Okay, so
So, thanks, Just. So I guess whenever you're ready, whoever's in charge can call it to order. It is being recorded as we speak.
Okay, so I will call the meeting to order and read the thing. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and Governor Healy's March 29, 2023 revised order extending remote participation by all members in any meeting of the public body. This meeting of the Great Barrington Affordable Housing Trust ADU Subcommittee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.townofgb.org. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to listen to the meeting may do so in the following manner. And it says see instructions at the top of the agenda. I guess I will just say that you may listen by being on the Zoom call. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. And we're going to start by reviewing the edits that we made to the purpose and criteria section. And then we'll just work our way down. So the worksheet that we've been using that Joe has up, thank you very much, Joe, for that, is basically for Vivian, who hasn't been in the meetings before, and Chris. It's a way for us to workshop the core ideas behind the proposal rather than be focused on drafting a RFP, but to get the concept and the language we want to use clearly. And then ideally be able to consult you, Chris, around anything when it comes to doing an RFP so that we're working at the standard that the town needs us to. So the first set of edits are the 2 lines in blue at the top of the table around purpose, and the task there, but from our discussion last time we met, was that we discussed clarifying that there are multiple components to the purpose, and specifically that part of the purpose of this pilot is to provide an opportunity for resident homeowners to have their own housing stabilized with additional income from the program. So having introduced it that way, I would love for folks to take a look at it, and we can make any small edits. If it seems like we need to do another deeper edit, we'll just put it in the next steps column. So what do folks think? Does that get better at what we were talking about, or better get at what we were talking about?
Yeah.
And Chris, your edits are welcome because you are constantly having to land on language that is clear and helpful to a wide variety of people.
Could you explain purpose 2? I just don't understand. To increase AMI protected. Oh, I get it now. Okay,
Yeah.
never mind.
Mm-hmm.
So a homeowner who's on over 100% could benefit sort of tangentially, but the focus, the ADU would be income limited.
Exactly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're trying to get at in 3, and I'm not sure that I worded it well, is later you'll see where we want to make sure that we have a wide enough net, that we aren't narrowing who can apply so much that nobody applies.
Mm-hmm.
But then we want to be able to prioritize within the applications based on for whom it would make the biggest economic difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that difference wouldn't necessarily be measured by the cost of the project. It would be measured by the difference the income from the rental unit would make on their own stability as a resident of Great Barrington.
So you could use, things like the cost of living that of being in GB or South County, like if it helps people attain a certain cost of living level, they might be prioritized even if they're over 100%. I'm talking about the resident owners. A way to sort of, if you get 100 applicants, you could prioritize those.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So in some ways, like it will help meet cost of living.
Mm-hmm. And I'd have to look back to see how cost of living is, what it actually is relative to AMI. I have it somewhere, just not in front of me.
Do you have cost of living for Great Barrington specifically?
I'd have to look. God, I feel like I just saw it the other day. Too many things.
I just was curious because I do a lot of math to get a South County cost of living from a county cost of living. And if something exists, it would be good for me to know.
If I saw it, it's probably based on your math.
Okay.
No, I can't remember if it was something the state issued or what.
Yeah.
I'll find it and I'll look at that.
All right. Joe, Bill, do either of you have thoughts or do you have requests for additional edits to that purpose section?
No.
All right. And so Chris, I'm hearing
Is ADUs are specified as studio 1 bedroom?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Maximum 900 square feet. So that's a pretty good 1 bedroom.
Yeah, so I would just leave that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
ADU, as defined in zoning, it's 900. It's
I can make that edit right now.
But
Done.
we're actually looking at what, between 300 and 400 square foot in order to kind of make the numbers work, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're again, like Bill, I think we're assuming that that's what would make the numbers work.
Yeah.
And I always think about like, I don't know what proposal somebody will put in front of us. That they may have other ideas and ways to make it happen. So yes, I had thrown that in there as a way to be a little clearer about like what's in our brain, but I don't think it has to be there.
All right. I was just running some numbers through the, mortgage calculator thing. And I took 135,000, about halfway between the two numbers you had put in one of these memos. And that's about $1,000 a month if you put 20% down, which the trust could do. And so there's room in there for somebody to make money.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you for always being willing to do the math.
Well,
So coming back to purpose, it's like, we'll take that parentheses out and then I might do one more pass at edits in the third purpose to incorporate language around cost of living for clarity. All right. Then moving into the applicant criteria section, the two blue highlights are the edits based on our notes from last time. And we had approved the sections in black already. So in the first section, the original draft was unclear. It sounded as though the applicant was responsible for all of the financing. And then the question was, well, why are they applying? So I tried to clarify that by saying
Yeah.
it's in cases where the total project cost would exceed the amount requested by the applicant must demonstrate the ability to finance the remainder of the ADU building or renovation project at the time of application.
That's good.
Great. I love it when it works. And then below that, this one we may need some discussion. The notes we had for ourselves was that we wanted this to reflect something a little bit broader than the first draft. So it says will assist owner to be able to afford their family's Great Barrington housing cost and remain in residence. And then
we don't say family anymore.
okay, what do we say?
Household.
Household or no unit, right?
Well, no, because in this case, we're actually talking about the applicants, not the
I'm-
structure.
I'm sort of kidding, but I thought the idea was like, I mean, I guess it's, found family or whatever, but
Household.
like we're not making a determination about family. I'm saying the
No,
word-
I appreciate
Okay.
that. So what I'd like to think through then in this part of the language is that, let's say we had an app, because this was some of the feedback I got from June at Constructs that I thought was helpful to think through. Is she was saying that people are reluctant to have somebody they don't know on their own property.
Mhm.
And that if we structured this in a way that it could be a housing solution for young people, if they could get family members to build ADUs. So in those cases, you might have a situation where the household that is building the ADU by itself may be doing kind of okay with their costs, but when you look at the larger picture inclusive of the young adult, the benefit. So I was playing with that here. I'm happy to, I'm not very attached. I didn't feel like, oh, I landed on this great wording.
Well, so when we were talking about, I forget what I was doing, but it was just when we were talking about like doing an actual like specific tiny home pilot. There was a specific issue where I reached out to are they called mass housing or something? And it was specifically about that Amy had a candidate in mind, but that candidate was actually like it was a family relationship, and I was asking like about that specific thing, and they were saying that once we come in to do a subsidy, it has to be the unit has to be on the open market, sort of like that. That's I don't know how.
Yeah.
Or I don't know what the actual like that was their sense of it, but I don't know how firm that has to be. But like that actual specific thing of I'm building affordable housing for my son in my backyard, and
I
then
don't think that's allowed.
we give you the money to do that. They were saying that you can't do that because then it's not like an open market. It's
Fair
like
housing.
it's a market of one.
The
Yeah.
fair housing situation.
Yeah, unfair housing.
Yeah.
So I had never thought of that until I asked them about that.
So I'm curious about that because in some of those early conversations about the tiny house model, we were talking about that there wasn't kind like in the application process, it sounded to me like there wouldn't have been a separation from the landowner and the resident of the tiny house or the owner of the tiny house on a pad, that like the project would be like one thing, like one application. And in this case, I'm just wondering if there's a difference, because in this case, we'd be having an application only with the homeowner, and their only requirement is that the applicant is screened for AMI eligibility.
Yeah.
I think there's still a fair housing issue if it's a family member.
So does that mean that further down, when we're talking about kind of structure and administration, there's an administration issue around how the unit is posted?
I think
Right.
so.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, that's when I started thinking about a registry, having a registry of rent eligible tenants. Because you could maybe have a situation where I don't know how it works, because then also, like, as the landlord, you can have a fair housing situation where you still, like, you don't have to accept every tenant, right? So,
No.
I mean, as long as it's not, like, discriminatory, like you can, I don't know what the actual, see, so in other words, like, if you had your, like, rental unit in your backyard, and then your son was on the list of people who are eligible, it would look very suspicious if they turned out to be the best tenant.
Right.
Right. So in some ways, it would be prohibiting the exact arrangement that would be the most
That would make the most sense. Yeah.
most viable arrangement. Well, let me put that on the task
Yeah.
list, and I will reach out. I have to reach out to Jane at Construct for something else, and I can ask her a little bit more about that. So back to the top here, just finishing up this section on the criteria, we want to change that word family.
Yeah.
I think household is good.
Okay,
That's what I've been using in some of the other stuff.
great. So then that criteria stands at applicants who demonstrate that the ADU rental income at 100% AMI will assist the owner to be able to afford their household's Great Barrington housing cost and remain in residence. There still needs some edits. Applicants who demonstrate this will be prioritized.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So are we good with that section? We feel comfortable making that recommendation?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. That'll be exciting. We set the AMI tenant requirements in the last meeting. This is the lingering task for here is for me to confirm with Jane the earlier conversation I'd had that she thought Construct was willing to play that role in doing the verification. Which brings us down to the loan structure and administration. So Bill, this is you and your information that you were digging up. So
Could I just stop you one?
yeah,
When you talk to Construct, see if there's, like an administrative fee or something
Yeah.
that they would charge, which would be totally reasonable. It's a lot of work, or could be a
Yeah.
lot of work.
Yeah.
great. So then under loan structure, this I think will be the bulk of our conversation tonight. The first question that we had from our last meeting, Bill, was when you had raised about whether it was possible to have the unit remain restricted after the sale of a property.
Well, that was a while ago. I did talk to a couple of people who said that you could have, it was not Stewart, but woman at CHP. They said CPA prefers that it stay affordable permanently, essentially, but that several towns had decided on their own that that was not going to be absolutely necessary in some situations. It's a vague area. I
So the
get a really good answer.
CPA law says that if you're acquiring the property using the CPA funds, then it's got to be affordable in perpetuity. So that's the case with the North Plain Road site, for example.
Right. But this is not actually acquiring the property.
Correct. So you're in this case, you'd be, quote, creating a unit, or, to use the CPA terminology, to use the actual verbs that CPA uses, you'd be creating the unit or supporting the unit. It doesn't require a permanent restriction, affordability restriction. And our own CPC, could say we want it to be a permanent, but they have not said that.
Right.
So I think, a 10-year would certainly be good. Longer would be great, but there's, I think 10 years is fine. The way the CPC usually looks at these, whether it's historic, their historic grants or whatever, it's kind of, during their discussions, they weigh the amount of the grant versus the public benefit that's received. And then they say, oh, well, maybe 10 years, oh, maybe a 20-year restriction, or, that's what they're trying to weigh.
Right.
So I just suggest that you
Yeah. Oh,
go through the same sort of.
yeah. We also
That-
have,
Go ahead, Bill.
we also have to weigh, how much money we're giving to the homeowner that's adding the ADU, and how much that's worth to them. In other words, is it worth it to them to do it for 10 years or 20 years? If we're only giving them $50,000, is that going to be enough to encourage people to do it?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. Then I also think, for the pilot phase, at least, and that experience may lead us to changing this, but for the pilot phase, at least, the idea is for us to put a bucket out there. Right now, we're talking about 100,000. I really think it should be 150,000, but I don't know if I can convince other people. That we set aside for the pilot, and then we take applicants. And the right applicant actually, we could select one applicant for the whole thing, or that could be 3 tiny homes and another something that somebody comes up with. So it's both that, like, we have to think about how much,
Because
and that it might vary, that different people might have smaller amounts than other people. So my thought is that if we go with 10 years, we can stabilize something and not be changing it for each applicant.
Yeah.
And then what I'm proposing is that we, part of how we regulate it is incentivizing completing those 10 years with the possibility of some partial loan forgiveness. But then we also have to say, well, what happens if they don't do it? And so that's the kind of sale question here. And also what comes after that, like what happens if they don't sell it, but they also just aren't following through. Joe, are you gonna pop in?
No, I was just thinking about in the event of a property sale.
It looked like you were conducting an entry point.
Well, so in the event of a property sale, the ADU must remain. But what about just does it have just, the wording is confusing for me because it's not just in the event of a property sale, right? It's just any
default on the agreement.
default in the agreement, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying it's not in the event of a property sale, it's the ADU must remain an affordable rental unit. And then say like this includes in the event of a property sale, like just, just as a tag.
Yeah.
Right. So-
And
I
then you
think
wrote,
a question we have though is like, can we do that, right? So if the applicant built the thing, had successfully keeps it rented to somebody who's eligible for 8 years, and then they sell the whole property. How would we, for the remaining 2 years, how would we restrict that ADU to an AMI restricted rental? Like, what's the mechanism for that?
isn't that the registry thing? The
Well,
town-
last time when we talked about it, we talked about that we may not have to be on the town registry. And also that what we were talking about was that it wouldn't be a deed restriction.
Right.
So I wonder, is it that if somebody sells the property, do they just have to pay back the loan in full at the time of sale?
I think that would be sufficient.
The only way to guarantee that is to put a lien on the property that's recorded against the deed in the registry of deeds. That's the only way to ensure that the restriction stays in force. And at sale, somebody is going to pay back the trust, or somebody is going to ensure that it's followed. That's really the only legal way to do it. Then you can lien the property if you have to, or it doesn't pass title at sale.
And so does that happen do you do that at the same time that you do the original loan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the way the housing trust's down payment assistance grant works. For example, it's a lien on the property, just like a mortgage is. It's the way we do the housing rehab work under the community development block grants. It's recorded on the deed. The CDBG housing rehab loan, let's say it's like a 10 or 15 year grant, and it diminishes over those years so that by year 10 or 15, it's zero payback. And if they sell or do something else, they can pay back whatever percent is remaining. So, and then in your example, if they sold at year 8, they could pay back the remaining percentage to the trust. Or the new person could continue to keep the lien on the property for the remaining 2 years. And assuming that your administrator is verifying everything is still fine. So I just went through one of those things with an old CDBG housing rehab loan.
Mhm.
It was, the home was being sold. The new owners just kept the lien going, which is fine. So purpose served, lien stays in place until it expires.
Yeah, I think that's the model.
So would it be correct to say 10-year property lien at the time the loan is made that is depreciated over the period of the loan?
You could do that. Yep.
Is that what we want to do, Bill and Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be all right.
It goes down by 10% per year over
Mhm.
10 years, and then goes to 0 at year 10. If, or whatever percentage you do. You could incentivize it to stay, in force longer by changing those percentages, like,
So this is good to have you here to talk through. So
if they sell it at year 7,
yeah,
you have to pay back 70%. That's really, so that's sort of saying to them, we want you to keep it in force for 10 years.
Mhm.
yeah. So the idea we're working through is that if the person, like, this is just a number, I'm not saying people will be able to do anything for 10,000, but if the loan is for $10,000, that they'd be paying on 50% of it over the 10 years. And at 10 years, if they continuously had it rented to an eligible tenant, the remaining 50% of the loan would be forgiven as a grant.
The lien just goes away.
Yeah.
That would be fine.
Okay. And so what I just said out loud about the 10-year property lien at the time of loan with the depreciation, that structure works for that 50% could be forgiven. Great. Okay. So that answers the question in blue about, do we need to be on a town registry and deed restriction, right?
That's, I assume you mean the registry of deeds? Is that what you mean by town registry?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know, because these are just my notes from last. Bill
But
knows.
I believe that's what we were referring to, yes.
Yep. Yep.
So the loan that the trust provides, if we say gave 10% down payment for this, or 20% even, that has to be paid back to us partly, but over time. So that adds to the monthly expense for the landlord, in addition to if they have a mortgage to cover the rest of it. So these numbers are going to get pretty close then, because if they're paying down $25,000 to the trust, half of that, on top of the $1,000 that they take out of the bank, or that they're paying back to the bank, rather. 100% of AMI looks like the only viable tenant.
We did decide that last time that we would go with 100% AMI.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, I mean, I think we have to keep doing this math that you're doing, Bill. And also, I think we have to remember that we're casting this net in part to see what creative options people will come up with, rather than,
Right.
right? Like, this is
Yeah.
a weird idea and will work for weird situations, but that's kind of what is happening for a lot of people in South County, is a lot of creativity. So,
Yeah.
like I said, somebody might have just enough savings that with a loan, they can do something they couldn't have done without that.
Yeah.
Somebody else might be able to put in a lot of their own labor. And so the loan is really to cover the subcontractors they have to have, and the actual material costs.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt, like, it's tight, and it's not the program we'd build with a magic wand.
Right.
Aren't we also hoping that eventually there'll be something on the tax side?
Yes.
That would be great. That could actually make it.
Make the numbers actually work out.
Yeah,
Plus,
if we're pushing over here and the tax stuff comes in over here, and you get them to merge over time.
Can I ask a question
And you
about?
get,
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, sorry. I want to ask a question about this 50%. And Bill's remark a minute ago. Are you envisioning this as every year the homeowner is paying back a portion of that 50% loan? Every year? Or, because I would envision it as they're not paying as they go. It's just that at year 10, for example, or at sale, 50% is due.
right.
Oh.
Right. So it wouldn't have any impact on the monthly. No.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that at sale, it would sort of affect the value of the sale. Somebody would pay less or more, and then the trust would get the cash back through the transaction. But that's a way so that moderate or low income household to whom the loan was given is not seeing that as a monthly or a yearly cost. It's just, it's due at the end. And they need to know that because it's a lien and it affects the value,
Okay,
So
but
do
it
they
doesn't
start?
affect the monthly income, for example.
yeah.
Right, but when does that, if it is actually a loan that we expect to get that money back, and they don't sell it at the end of 10 years, when do they start paying it back?
But it could be at 10 years. If you wanted it 10 years, you could say at 10 years.
Well, yes, but it's unlikely that they'll have 50 grand stashed away to pay it back or whatever they need to pay back.
Right, right. Well, then maybe after 10 years, it starts to, even that 50% that's remaining can start to go away.
Yeah. So
So
essentially,
that you could say like, so after 10 years, after 10 years of successful rental, 50% of the loan is gone. So now
Yeah.
from 10,000, you have 5.
After 20 years, it all
And
goes,
after 20 years, it's
Just-
all.
for example. Oh, you have a hand
Yeah.
raised. Would you like to take that?
No, I was just saying, I like that. Oh, you want to raise your hand?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Joe.
But yeah.
Eileen, you just lowered your hand. Maybe it was the cat.
I think the camera is picking up Joe's hand movements.
oh, cool.
Yeah,
Sometimes I have that all of a sudden my hand is raised or
Just,
thumbs up.
No, I had raised my hand. I think that's what Chris saw.
I did.
It's
Yeah.
Eileen from the newsletter.
Yeah, I mean,
I had a question, but I'm not sure because I turned in late. I'm not sure that I have the correct interpretation. But if somebody doesn't pay back after 10 years, won't the person have a loan that simply doesn't get paid back? Isn't there that possibility?
Yes,
As I said, I'm not sure it's a sensible question because I
yes, but
turned in late.
it's a lien on against the property. So
Yeah.
somebody's gonna have to pay it at some point, just like a mortgage.
Uh-huh. Okay,
So
Okay.
in this scenario that we're working through, Chris, this idea that you have,
And by the way, Amy Turnbull is also in the audience with Eileen, and
oh, good.
if folks need to unmute and say, just raise your hands. Eileen, you raised your hand again. But Ananda, I interrupted you.
Oh, sorry, I meant to hit, right, I meant to hit whatever.
Okay. So in this idea that we're working through, Chris, we've worked through the best case scenario. The best case scenario is this is a way that we can make sure more is going into the homeowner's pocket sooner. And that you get to year 10, 50% is forgiven, and then there's an option. You could go another 10 years and have the other 50% forgiven. So now let's work through some worst case scenarios. What happens if they do get to successfully through to year 10, but at year 10, they don't want to keep renting it? Is what happens with the 50% that's due?
If they decide to sell, it would be due
Through the sale.
through the sale because it wouldn't clear title. And if they decide not to keep renting, they keep the property, they decide not to keep renting it to a qualifying household, then this would be a lien on the property that I think, well, I'd have to see how is that enforced. So that's a question for me. Don't know.
Is
Okay.
there anything where you can sell the loan? Like if it like sell as into, there's no interest on the loan. And so like, is there anything that we could, the public-private partnership where you could be like, the 50% will be managed by some bank? Like we're not interested in managing it if they can't pay it right away.
If there's no interest, there may not be any interest from a bank in buying
No,
something.
what I'm saying is that at 10 years, I'm saying like if they're like, well, I actually didn't save up the money.
Right.
It's like, okay, we'll put you on an installment plan, but that's going to be on interest. But we wouldn't want to, in 10 years, who knows? But we would not want to operate anything like that. I don't think we can.
Hmm.
So I'm saying, like, we could just say, like, okay, well, I mean, honestly, it's on them. They could just go to the bank and say, I need to pay, in theory, it was $25,000. I don't have the money, so I'll take out a HELOC. I don't know. I mean, like this, you know what I mean? Like maybe they figure it out.
I don't know.
But I was kind of saying, like, maybe we could hold their hand to do that process. It's also like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that there's two issues, like what you're raising, Joe, is like, what are the possibilities that we could open up at that point? And then there's a second issue that's like, what are the mechanisms we have that we like, because we will need to take action whether or not we have somebody who is interested in opportunities and possibilities that we put on the table. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, isn't the lien is just like a legal thing. He's like,
Right. And what I'm hearing Chris say is that a question then is, so what happens then with, like, if you have that lien and they don't have the 50% to pay back and they're not going to extend another 10 years, then what exactly happens?
I think, as I think about it, I think the town would place a notice of default on the deed, much like your mortgage company would if you start to miss payments. You get a warning. After a few warnings, they actually put a notice of default on, which could then go to a notice of foreclosure.
Right. And so we
So
don't want to be
I'll
setting
think that
people up
through a
for
little bit.
that.
I'll think it through a little bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's where I think what you were saying, Bill, is really relevant.
Hmm.
That to what extent would it help if we're just basically deferring payments and the replacement is a large lump sum payment?
Right.
On the other hand, like maybe it's a possibility that you say you can defer the payments for the first 10 years, and then you could either extend and have full loan forgiveness, or you could then you could make payments for the payments on your remaining balance for the next 10 years.
One way banks, so when a bank has a mortgage on the property, they own the property. So for mine, the bank is collecting my money every month, and with my money, they're paying my taxes. So I don't actually write a check to the town, my bank does.
Hmm.
They could do the same thing here, where they could, of course, this would affect the homeowners monthly. And back to that, it would affect the bank could collect the balloon payment, the 10-year payment into escrow, for example, so they would hold that if needed, so they could clear title if needed at year 10. That'd be something, Joe, where we'd want to work with a bank to see how to partner on that. I don't know if it's.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we want to do everything in our power to both limit the risk to the homeowner and make sure that we have the mechanisms we need in place to enforce the terms.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm thinking about, like, if you get to 10 years and there are like 3 options, you pay the 50% back right then, and the other 50% is forgiven, and you're done, and you can do whatever you want with the property.
Hmm.
Another option is you can extend for another 10 years and we won't have any payments, and the whole of the loan will be forgiven at 20 years. And a third option is you can make payments on the remainder with a 10-year horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, the only problem is just the management part of it, right? The administration.
Well, let's talk about that part. That was one of the reasons we really wanted you here, Chris, because we didn't want to get too crazy without the town telling us about what is
yeah.
actually manageable.
I think we have to get either the CDC or Construct involved to manage that, and that would have to be part of a
Actual loans?
managing how things, not managing the loan so much as making sure that the criteria for the loan are met.
Yeah,
If they're not met, they would have to notify the town, the trust.
Yeah.
And then the town would have to take action, or the trust would have to take action, either through possibly through the town treasurer to actually place the lien on the property. That's what happens if you don't pay your taxes. The treasurer puts a lien on the property. And that's not a huge lift to do. We do it often, sort of the course of doing business. But we need to know that we're relying on somebody's a really good monitoring agent who's helping us.
so what I'm imagining is that the verification that that the tenant meets requirements lives with hopefully Construct, based on my conversations with Jane.
Mhm.
And what we've discussed so far, Chris and Vivian, Eileen and Amy, I think you were present when we had these discussions. So what we've discussed so far is that verification would happen at the time of the application and the original lease.
Mhm.
And then in subsequent years, as long as that tenant is the tenant, you're verifying that the tenant is the same tenant. You're not doing a new lease verification.
Correct.
If there's
That's
a
how it
new
works.
tenant / new lease, you start at ground zero again for verification. So that they then what we would want, that they report on an annual basis on each of the properties to the town, just the verification status of each property.
Mhm.
And then that the town would be holding the actual loan side, in the same way that we have the down payment program structured.
Right.
Mhm.
So part of our questions for you today, Chris, is to make sure that we're not that how we're structuring the loan is appropriate. And what does the loan administration part entail? How do we make good policy there that is actually supportable given the capacity of the town?
Not something I can answer right now, but none of this seems like crazy out of the ordinary. So,
Well, that's good to hear.
So
yeah, we as I said, we do similar things already for taxes, for housing rehab loans, for the down payment assistance grants. So it's not unknown to our staff. If we get a lot of these, it'd be both great and difficult.
It'll be
This is
overwhelmed.
the beauty of a pilot. It's going to be capped, and then we have a pause to decide where we go from there.
Yeah, and I don't think we have to give $100,000 to one person. I mean, $25,000 or $30,000 would be enough for a down payment that gets the monthly mortgage and taxes and everything down where you'd still have maybe $500-600 a month coming in over the top. So, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and so that
I mean, it's a really tiny place to rent for that kind of money, but
right. So I think we can have more discussion about that in the application
Mhm.
process section. Let's just see if we are ready to wrap up the loan structure and administration section. So as I have it from the conversation we've had so far, we are good to recommend that it goes something like this. In the event of a property sale, the entirety of the loan will be due at the time of the sale.
Yes, absolutely.
The 10-year property lien at the time the loan is made that is depreciated over the time of the loan. Does that contradict what we just said, Chris?
It kind of does. So
Yes, I just
Uh,
caught that.
if you can say if it's sold within 10 years, then the entire thing is paid back. If it's sold after 10 years, then at least 50% has to be paid back. I mean, yeah, just have to be consistent.
I think that's fine. That works out.
In 10 years. So in the event of a property sale within 10 years, the entirety of the loan is due at the time of sale. And in the event or in a sale at,
Or the other option, which I mentioned earlier, is that the new owner keeps the lien in place and continues to go with the program.
Right.
okay,
Would the new owner only have to finish out the last few years? And
Yeah.
then pay it back?
I think so.
Okay. So the new owner would eventually have to pay us back anyhow.
They would probably split. They would probably do some split the money they're getting back.
Right, at the closing, yeah,
So they would take that into account.
yeah, okay.
all right, so in the event of a property sale within 10 years, the entirety of the loan is due at the time of sale with no grant eligibility. Or the new owner may keep the lien in place and continue the program.
Yes.
A 10-year property lien is placed at the time the loan is made.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's it, period, nothing after that.
Or,
Should the landlord fail to maintain primary residency on the property after loan approval, before or during construction, funds will be withdrawn?
yeah,
They move away, and then
Say that again, Joe?
I'm just so. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the whole purpose of this is to pair primary residency.
Right.
So
Okay, sure.
you can't like leave and make the main house a rental property.
right,
So in that particular case, you haven't actually written the check yet. And so that's the question of when do you write the check? Is it when that ADU gets a certificate of occupancy? Or is it like at building permit?
I
So
I think to encourage
This
people.
is a good
to-
discussion to have. We wanted to have this discussion.
Yeah, I think in order to encourage people to do this, you have to offer it as sort of like the same as we do as a down payment on a mortgage. We write a letter to the bank saying we are prepared to give this person 20% down payment on this ADU.
Mhm.
And they take that to the bank and that gets figured in, and when the closing comes, we deliver a check of 20%
When the closing.
at the
Right.
closing, when the
Oh,
closing
okay.
loan for the ADU.
When the closing loan for the ADU.
I'm assuming that they're going to have a bank loan.
Okay, so close the loan for the ADU. We pair our money with whatever other money they're getting.
Mhm.
Right,
And then there is a period of time where they're building the thing.
yeah.
Mhm.
Do we need to say like, if you haven't built it in 12 months, then ...
Yes,
So
That money
So
comes,
this is where Barnstable might be helpful.
Hmm.
My recollection is they don't do it. They do like a cost reimbursement.
oh right, yeah, that we talked about that.
And I don't know that we want to be cost reimbursement because we can increase access by putting down some funds up front.
yeah,
But also, like, we want to prevent a situation where we've put our funds in and they can't complete the project.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it might be, it might be 20, 30, 50, and you do 20% at the outset, 30% can be spread out over the project, and then 50% is when you hit like, and this is where we'd need some help, but some final stage inspections pass or something.
Well, certificate of occupancy, I think would be,
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to making that last chunk available while there still was some work to do, just at a verifiable point where we can see that it will be able to be done.
To go back to the idea of having a bank partner, like, and maybe this is where constructs could come in, that you could do it as there's like a specific checking account that they have to make all purchases against. So then it's like, okay, you did 5,000 here, we know what that's for. You went to the paint store, like you did this transaction at the hardware store, whatever. Not like, yeah, just so. And with the idea of like, if at a certain point they say like, well, actually we can't build it, then you kind of know what happened. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not to speak for Jane, but to speak as somebody who manages a nonprofit, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Setting up the accounts.
Managing that,
yeah,
like, that's high management. And I don't think it would allow us to manage for success anyway. So
Yeah.
for the same reason that we wouldn't hand that to the town, I don't think any partner would take that structure on.
yeah.
So
A reimbursement isn't too hard to do. We structure most of our grants in that way. All
Yeah.
the CPA grants are reimbursement grants. I think all the ARPA grants are reimbursement grants. So we literally look for like an invoice and a check that was written, like to Harrington's Lumber, Mrs. Smith wrote a check for $500.
Yeah.
That is proof that we can reimburse that.
Mhm.
So that's something that we do for other programs.
Doing picking a percentage that's an upfront payment and doing cost reimbursement is within what's possible. Is anybody else concerned about kind of holding a chunk back for the final stages of construction as a way to make sure it gets there?
it just seems too complicated to me. To me, it seems like it's just an extra moving part. I kind of feel like I feel like the due diligence is actually, that is work for, I guess, for Affordable Housing Trust. That like when you evaluate like the proposal, and then if they can't build it, they owe it. So, I feel like that my inclination is just to, if you can do a reimbursements thing, that sounds good to me. Otherwise, I'd just say do a lump sum, like have it be like a HELOC.
What feels unmanageable to you about like tying like a end payment to a particular set of inspections?
The only complicated thing is just like, what feels unmanageable is just like, for the same reason why we're not saying like we're going to do $20,000 grants for this program, we're saying we're doing some amount of money between 0 and 150. for the same reason, like, I don't know if I can say like, to build a successful ADU, you need like this much for materials and this much for final costs, whatever. Like, I just don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Like, and in the worst case scenario, would be like, if you like doom this.
Like not having the money available could be the thing that is preventing them from getting to the end stage.
Exactly.
I wouldn't want to do that.
So what about doing something like 50% upfront and then cost reimbursement following that?
That might be enough in some cases.
Sure. That could be okay.
50% upfront, 50% when they have a certificate of occupancy, and there you go.
Well, Bill, that's where I do take Joe's point that you could run out of money.
Mhm.
You could use that first, because like, let's say you're somebody who's not going to be taking out a mortgage
Mhm.
and they use their first 50%, but they can't get to a certificate of occupancy because they don't have access to the other 50%.
Yeah.
Because the certificate of occupancy is the very last thing.
Yeah,
So that's why, like, Joe, you convinced me to move away from that lump sum at the end model.
okay, yeah, I see that.
Yeah, so I don't really understand what you get with the reimbursement. If, I mean, I guess it's just like an audit log, and it's like a just for auditing purposes, but you would assume like you assume that there's not somebody who's like building like a really tiny house and then they're asking for more money than the house costs. Like that, you know what I mean? Like that would be like a weird scam.
Yeah,
I assume at time of application, you've got some sort of budget that has to be submitted to you, right?
yes,
There's nothing wrong with giving a lump sum up front,
Yeah.
the entire thing up front, because you still got that lien on the deed.
Yeah.
You know, you still have a legal mechanism to reclaw your money back
Mhm.
if you need to.
So that's where I would say, yes, we've covered our legal basis, but then if we want to be structuring something to support, to like maximize success.
Yeah.
I think having a structure that moves with the project for part of the project will help people not suddenly find themselves like, oh shit, I really screwed up. And my only option is I have this damn lien because I can't finish this.
Sure.
Because that's like the lien then becomes pretty high stakes. And so I think we really want to prevent people from ending up in that boat to the
Mhm.
best of our ability with the structure without being so onerous that people can't get the thing done.
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right, so then I have, so disbursement, 50% upfront, 50% cost reimbursement. Prior to construction, I just reworded this based on the discussion. So I added prior to construction completion, should the landlord fail to maintain primary residency on the property after loan approval, but before or during construction, funds will be withdrawn. After construction, owners who cease to reside on the property after occupation will not be eligible to turn 50% of the loan into a grant.
Mhm.
And then repayment, what we discussed about the 10-year. And
Yeah.
then the 3 options at 10 years. Which
Yes,
I have to type a little bit more, but I made in notes.
Do you want to put some language about 12 months? Like the completion of the project within 12 months.
Does that matter to us?
I mean, in principle, if you're saying, oh, well, are we saying, I mean, does the 10-year period start when the loan goes or when the
Oh,
rent?
good question. That's 10 in my mind, and I will have to check if it is in words, but we should put it in words. In my mind, it's 10 years of successful rental. So if then that 10-year period, you didn't have somebody there for a year, you're like on pause
right.
until you have somebody renting it again.
Yes, exactly. You have to have 10 years of someone being there as a tenant in the affordable unit.
Oh, so you can do a pause?
I think we would have to. I mean, if it takes somebody 3 years to build a place, they're gonna count that as, and there's nobody living there, well, that doesn't help. Then they only have to wait 7 years.
There's just some weird edge case where you take the money, you don't finish it, and you
Yeah.
never.
Well,
Yeah,
that's where the lien comes in.
Right.
but that's what I mean. It's like 10 years after you rent, if you never rent.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, when does this clock start ticking? Is the question.
I think that could be agreed upon individually. Somebody says, this is only gonna take me 9 months to build. We give them 10. If they say it's gonna take me a year and a half to build, we could give them 2 years. We could work that out. I mean, I don't think there's gonna be 100 of these every year. I think if we get one a year, it would be plenty.
that would be a lot of really tiny projects, Bill.
Yeah,
What but what's the wording for that? Or do like just the is there like a discretion?
we would ask for a time frame from the homeowner that's gonna add the ADU to their property. We would say, how long is it gonna take you to build this? And that would be part of the criteria. You know, if it's only gonna take a year, that's good. They should have some estimate from a builder somewhere.
So time frame will be determined.
On a project basis.
A project basis, and it's just like, in the event that owner can't build within a reasonable time frame, like, it's obviously like, if you go like 1 month over, we're not trying to make people fail,
Right.
but if someone misses their deadline by 2 months, that's fine, but if they miss their deadline by 2 years, maybe that's a problem. So
So time frame determined on a project basis. I'm suggesting we determine it in the final stages of an application process.
Right. We want to have a contract with a builder. We want to have all that
sure. But
information.
if they go over the time frame to a significant amount, so it's like that vague wording, then we can withdraw it.
Yeah,
Um,
if it's not spent already.
well, I think that for good policy, we would definitely need to say what we meant by significant.
It's relative, right? If someone's saying it's going to take a year, and they take a year and 6 months, maybe that's reasonable. But if they say it's going to take 2 months and it takes a year, maybe that's unreasonable. You know what I mean? So I feel like, can't it be relative? Like, can't we just put that ambiguity in there so that we have leeway?
Well, generally, the reason you can't is because when you have the two situations and
Yeah.
one person says, hey, you
Yeah.
didn't treat me the same way you treated the other person. They got to keep finishing their project and I lost my project and owe you all this money.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know. I mean, maybe then it's kind of like, if somebody says I can complete it in 12 months, so we say like, why don't you say 16 months? Like we tell them to put in their own buffers.
Yes,
I wonder if there's just something that triggers a review.
Mhm.
If that's a way to have the room you're asking for, Joe, like if it's at 6 months past the projected project completion date, that triggers a review with the Affordable Housing Trust. And we have to give we have to formally extend and revise the project completion timeline.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that could work.
Yeah. I mean, that's, yeah. They come and they talk about they explain their story.
And what if we don't find their story acceptable? Can we take the money out?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's 6 months over deadline. That triggers a review and a revised timeline agreement with the Affordable Housing Trust. And if the Affordable Housing Trust refuses to make an agreement, you know, there's a couple options, right? Like we could cease disbursements. And they could then be liable for the funding they did receive.
Mhm.
Yeah, of course.
And there's still the lien. And at that point, Chris, like, so let's say we made the original 50% disbursement. And for ease in this scenario, they actually never file anything for the cost reimbursements. And they're just stuck, and it's 6 months over their timeline. And we do a review, and our assessment is like nothing is ever going to happen with this project. But
Mhm.
the liens on the full amount of the loan, right? Is there a way or an option that we could be like, okay, we're going to cut our losses, no more money to them. So now they just owe that half of the original amount.
Mhm.
Would the lien still be for the full amount automatically?
No, I think you could file a discharge for
Okay.
portion of the grant that they never used,
Yeah.
and just
Oh,
keep, you know, they used 5 of the 10,000. You could just lean against the 5,000, discharge the rest.
Yeah.
If needed. Yeah.
So initially it would be for the full amount, the lien on the property.
I think so. I mean, the other way you could do it, it's a little bit looser, is just like sign a grant, some sort of a grant agreement up front that says, you know, it's a legal document. It's enforceable in court, with some struggle probably, but it's a grant agreement that says, you know, the grant is going to total $10,000. It's going to be dispersed 5,000 up front, and then on a reimbursable basis or some whatever you want. And then at the end, we're going to file a lien to record this on the deed.
Mhm.
You know, so I guess you could do it without the lien up front. You could just do it under a grant agreement, and that makes the construction and disbursement process a little bit easier, a little bit less control, but a little bit easier, a little bit easier to be flexible for a project that hits the skids a little bit and then maybe can restart.
Mhm.
I'm just looking at the time, and I know we need to have time for citizen speak and subcommittee member speak. I'd love to wrap up this last question. So on this idea of, do we want the lien to happen at the time of the original agreement and first loan disbursement, or would we prefer to structure that as a grant agreement and have the lien occur at the time of project completion?
I don't know which is best there.
And just to reiterate, but a lien is not technically required under CPA, and a permanent lien certainly is not required.
Okay.
But I think it's desirable to record this sort of 10-year grant and, you know, 10-year loan grant thing. I think eventually a lien is good practice. It helps in case there's sales and things like that.
Okay. So
It seems like a lien at some point is worth it for the sale component.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, like, let's definitely have a lien occur,
yes.
because that will make the sale component really viable, and that's good for the town.
Mhm.
So for me, then, if other people agree with that, the question then becomes, does the lien occur at the time of the first disbursement? Or do we structure the construction process as a grant agreement and have the lien occur at the time of project completion?
Or last disbursement. The
Or last
the last 10% shall not be dispersed unless the lien is recorded or something like that.
Okay,
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
sounds right.
you don't want to create a lien that you're not going to use.
Yeah. And we can test this, we can talk to a bank and, kind of run a scenario. Would you be okay if we, had a grant agreement and the borrower, was getting the cash according to this grant agreement, but at the end of the day, we're going to record a secondary lien. Are you, bank lender, going to be okay with that? And sort of ground truth it a little bit.
So if we're going with the lien occurs at the time of the last disbursement, back to our time frame scenario. So at 6 months over deadline, a review is triggered for a revised timeline agreement with the Affordable Housing Trust. If no agreement can be reached, the grant agreement if no agreement can be reached, now what happens? That we're not having a lien at that that part.
We've got to come to an agreement. There's got to be an understanding for the trustees to sign the first grant agreement. I mean, you can't proceed without.
Right, no, so this is like, you have the first grant agreement. Things, you do the original, you do the disbursement, you get stuck. It's 6 months after they should have completed things. Now they have to make another agreement with us. But if we will not agree to,
7 years.
if we're looking at it, we're like, nope, this is it. No, then what are we doing? No agreement can be reached. There'll be no further disbursement.
Yeah, and you'd take some legal action against the grantee. I'm not sure what that would be. But there's always the catch-all clause. This shall be enforceable under Massachusetts law. We're all applicable.
All right.
There's a long standard paragraph.
Yep. Got it. Okay, so it is 7:48 and Joe has a hard stop. I think it's related to bedtime for littles.
Sure.
So let's do the last part of our meeting. Trustee speak time.
Nothing.
I always have something to say. This is Amy.
Citizen speak time. And we'll start with Great Barrington residents and then non-Great Barrington residents. Great Barrington residents. All right, Amy, you are up.
Oh, that's sad that we don't have any Great Barrington.
We do, they just are not
You're not talkative?
themselves of this time.
I used to be a Great Barrington resident. Does that count?
No, but we would welcome you back.
So I have 3 things and I'll try to be as quick as possible. So the first one is under the application criteria, when we were talking about eligibility. I think eligibility should remain the domain of the homeowner only. I mean, we do not tell people who are currently landlords who they can rent to. And the idea is that we're creating more units, right? Isn't that the bottom line of what we're trying to do?
It is not.
More affordable units is what we're trying to do.
I understand, but and there will be a covenant still attached to that. So but theoretically, if there is an affordable unit, anyone, including someone's son, could rent it. As soon as you start saying who can rent it, then it's a Pandora's box. So I think it would be safer and require less oversight if you make it just the domain of the landlord. Just something to think about.
So for clarification, because this isn't a discussion, I don't want to push us that way, but I just want to clarify that the issue there was about legally what we're required to do, and the action item attached to it will be to get clarification about, so we know we're required to have AMI restrictions for use of these funds. And then secondarily, there's a question about how the applications have to be solicited and evaluated under fair housing law. So the action item will be to get more clarity around that. So you will hear more, Amy.
Okay, good. So the other thing was oversight. So I feel if you made a 100% forgivable loan over less time, you'd have a lot less oversight. And then my second concern is if you don't do that, who is going to manage this? Even at the pilot level, you are signing off for a 10-year commitment to someone or some people. My hope is that you will not just give it all to one person, that we will go back to where this started, which was with, for my purposes anyway, creating more units. So if you only create one unit, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to have oversight. But if we stay within what we started talking about a year ago, where we had several smaller units with smaller amounts of money, then that could really be a problem. And I'm surprised that Jane has agreed to take some of this on, because I did reach out to her first. And she said that she does not take, that her model at their nonprofit is not about workforce housing. So perhaps she's had a change of thought, but you may have to hire someone to do that. And my last thing was, and I think I already touched on it, was the 5-year. So I sent Bill today a lengthy forwarded email from someone I reached out to who is in my network. His name is Cole Peterson. And I know you guys are fond of looking at projects that are near, like Nantucket, but I would caution you that the majority of the changes that are happening, and I've said this before, are in California and Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and he is the ADU expert. So perhaps Bill can send that to you. There's a lot of great information there. And I sent him the proposal from Great Barrington, and he has made specific comments about it. Whether I ever build a tiny house or not, it is my heart, and I am always available to help out. That's it.
Thank you very much, Amy. And with that, we may adjourn.
Do you need to say press speech? Is it?
Eileen, do you have anything that you would like to add or ask?
No,
Okay. Thank you for that reminder, Joe. All right. And so we are adjourned.
All right, good meeting. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.